World boss loot, item 395, which is equivalent to mid-tier normal.
I hate world bosses.
Now, yeah, you might be saying, mid-tier normal, what's that? Glad you asked, because now it's time to talk about the big change. Okay, I'll just TLDR real quick for everyone. Master loot is not coming back. Personal loot is gone from raids. Personal loot will be used to distribute some crafting resources that are a part of raid, progression, but the actual loot itself is group loot only. Need greed. The Need Greed UI will return, and Blizzard will be updating the rule set for that. Because there's a lot of people that hear about Need Greed, and they're like, what if somebody needs in something they don't need? Well, you'll only be able to need in stuff that's relevant to you. And we're not in a situation where hunters are wielding two-handed weapons, in which case you're playing Wrath Classic, you're me, and you're like, oh, that's a hunter weapon, and that's where all those memes back in the day came from. So it's a bit weird. What it does mean, though, honestly, there's a lot of implications here, right? So personal loot was basically just the loot, in a way, almost not, dropping from the boss. It would kind of like generate the loot and give it to people. It would all be a probability thing.
It felt like...
It does feel
felt like one-arm bandit. Click, there you go. And what's the game going to roll at me? Oh yeah, it's that. As opposed to, I've killed boss drop me.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing, because
difference.
So much of that is the little imperceptible difference of how it feels. Because now, the boss dies, there is loot on the boss's corpse, and the Need Greed UI appears and you make your roll. Yeah. So that's basically that. And along with this, they've removed all item level restrictions. Yeah. Now, this is also quite interesting. It does mean that, the allocation of loot can now be done by the group. Now, but it's doing that in a way where there can literally be no tyrannical master loot person distributing the gear, because ultimately, if you can need for a bit of gear, the Blizzard policy that is encoded in this system is that if you win the need roll, it is yours, despite what anyone says. So, in a way, it is not, in the end result, it's not that different from personal loot, really, just that the loot more literally drops in the boss, and you have more visibility into that process. However, with visibility comes scrutiny, and when people can scrutinize loot distribution as done by a random roll, you could get a lot of salt. What happens if you get a minor upgrade and you need rolled on it and you are correct to roll need, but somebody feels really salty because they really need that thing and they ask for the trade and you're like, no, this is an upgrade for me. Yeah. But, hey, it's an MMO, social things can happen, and I suppose a lot of us would say that the more that you try to, overprotect the social situation forever, you almost create this, hyper-individualistic me, pull the lever game, which a lot of people would then say is very much running against the core of an MMO.
Yes, that's very, very, very interesting hypothetical. That's also how World of Warcraft has developed over the last series of time. Yeah, it's profoundly... The dice roll controls all, but in a way that doesn't feel like the game dice roll. It feels like an actual dice roll. Because, if you don't get personal loot, the game fucked you. If someone rolls higher than you, the dice roll fucked you.
Yeah.
Those are two very, very different feelings. Now, because you had a chance, whereas you had a transparent chance, whereas maybe there you didn't feel like you had a chance. And that's very, very different.
Now, there's another dimension to this. Personal loot implicitly punished mail wearers.
Yep.
Because there were fewer mail-wearing classes in the game, and personal loot guaranteed that the loot drops will be usable by people there. So in an averaged-out raid comp, there proportionately will be fewer mail users, which means less mail loot, less chances of somebody getting a mail drop that they don't need that they then could, send over to you. Personal loot could also be exploited by armor type stacking, You could just stack up all of the same armor type or weapon type, and you could use that to funnel gear. A lot of this, of course, is what goes on with all the split runs and the fun degeneracy that throws up or appears in the Race to World First. I don't say degeneracy as a pejorative. That is more specifically referring to a generally not intended manipulation of game mechanics, and I think a lot of the World First Raiders would agree that, it is a sort of degenerate use of the loot system, but also we're going to do what we do to get the power because we're really competitive, and that's just how that works. The other thing then a lot of people would say, and this is, in a way, was almost my first thought, because I think for some of the match-made content, personal loot can be just fine. it can feel like dead and very unfantastical, but a lot of people would say at the very least it just cuts out negative experiences. So there's a spectrum of opinion in that. I think it's okay that we can respect all points of that spectrum. But having both is actually what they had in Legion. Mm-hmm. And this actually created loads of loot table problems. Now, a loot table, how do we interact with that as gamers? We look at the loot and the boss, and that's really the last that we will think about it.
That's a developer problem.
But yeah, it's a developer problem, but it is actually a problem. Designing loot tables is harder than one would intuit, as it turns out. Pretty damn complex. So when a loot table has got to work for two different loot systems, one where it is just everything has an equal chance to drop, and another one where shit's got a dynamic chance of dropping depending on group comp and all that stuff, it actually does make things way harder for Blizz. So ultimately their decision has been, okay, Master Loot, we're not going to bring that back. We're not going to give that power into one player's hands. Let's go for Need Greed, because it basically works good enough in every scenario. And if we remove trading item level restrictions, then guilds can distribute gear depending on who needs it most. And you might say, what? Oh, is this raiding socialism? Or something like that, you know? Is me giving up a weapon because Nikki needs a weapon? Is that in fact the liberal agenda ran amok? Well, I just describe it as teamwork, and ultimately a raid team is just that. It's a team.
Fucking Corbynite.
I mean, I'm taking the piss there. But like, you know, for some people, it's like, look, if something drops and it's a 5-item level upgrade for me, but a 15-item level upgrade for somebody else, I will happily give that to the other person. Reason being, they're in my team. We do, in fact, have the same fucking goal, which is to progress through the raid. So I want what's best for the team. But I think the problem is, in a world where everything is just fucking match-made queues, and I'm not really blaming the players here, this is like overall, honestly, society and all video games, but when everything turns into a match-made, you know, hop into the thing to get my rewards, it changes perceptions. And I think that's why World of Warcraft is always at its healthiest when people are playing in a stable group of people they've been playing with for years. But I know that for maybe even the majority of the people listening, that is a rare thing. You know? We've been playing with the same people since patch 8.3. I mean, some people came, some people have left, but you know, there has been a core group and we have played with that core group, and that's been great. You know, we don't go crazy at each other about loot. We try to help each other out. And that means that raiding is a really nice, cooperative, fun experience with lots of pain and laughter.
Mostly pain and laughter.
For a lot of people, it doesn't end up being like that because they have to pug the raid. And Blizzard, I mean, how many expansions have they talked about the guild finding tools in the game not being great?
All of them, right?
Yeah. Now, there is one thing I think we should talk about that's really important, because the thing that is make or break for the loot system, obviously, is the rules. And Blizzard have clarified people's fears. And actually, I think this is really good information. So here are some examples, right? Because they have improved group loot a lot from when it was last shown in 2016. So let's get into it. In the past, Need Greed, the system only knew if something was equipable or was the right armor type, not if it was meant for your spec or not. That's now changed. So it's going to be smart about your spec. So you can never need for anything your class cannot wear. Warriors can't snipe cloth for some reason or troll. They also have main spec and off-spec functionality that is based on your loot specialization. That's the improvement. That's big. So obviously your main spec takes priority, then your off-spec, then greed. So while a paladin can't off-spec loot a shield away from a main spec roll from the tank, anyone rolling greed could never win it over the ret paladin, because the ret paladin can actually use that off-spec. Players will not be able to win multiples of the same item. So if 2 shoulders drop, you can need in both of them, but winning one will remove you from the role of the other.
Hey, nice. That's really smart.
Additionally, players can't need on a piece of loot if they are wearing that exact piece at the exact item level. Again, makes sense. Now, of course, if it drops the tertiary stat or a socket, then, you know, that role will, of course, be something the player can do. Lastly, even after winning the role, items remain fully tradable without restrictions to any player that was eligible as a looter, as in, if you weren't locked to that boss previously. Inversely, this means that players who have already killed boss 1 in normal for the week can't join for that boss and have loot traded to them. As many in this thread have speculated, all players in personal loot were constantly rolling behind the scenes, whether you wanted to or not. It's not as simple as, with group loot, you're rolling against everyone, but in personal loot, you're rolling against fewer. Changing to group loot for raids makes the process of acquisition and distribution more transparent and gives players more freedom to trade loot around the place. Additionally, this is going to be active in looking for raid, but they're open to taking action such as increasing the quantity of loot from LFR if the friction proves to be too much. Overall, this is what I wanted to hear. Whoops, there we go. This is what I wanted to hear. I have now heard it. Many, probably most or all of my worries have been dispelled.
Yep.
Good. All right. Done.
It's surprising how there's a lot of system changes we're going. Yeah, we see no problems with that.
It's like, yes, watertight.
Yeah, or it's likely not. Or it's like at least where there are like gaping holes are going, we know that hole's there, we assume it's not going to be a problem. Or we've got a bucket to throw out into the water where it is there and we'll solve that later. And you're like, yeah. I mean, here's the thing, right? If you went to a car salesman and he tried to sell you something that was clearly, let's say, past its sell by date a little bit, and then said, this may need a couple of repairs in the next few years. And, I'd be very careful about overusing the brakes, but here it is as a discount. That would be that you'd accept that if that's what you're in for. But if you went over and he was trying to say this is the most gorgeous, beautiful car you've ever seen, there are no problems, and you look at it and you see it's full of holes, you're like, bruh, what are you doing? What the fuck is this? Why are you lying to my face? And there's none of that happening, largely speaking, for these systems. It's like, hey, there's gonna be problems, but we'll try to get around to them, and that's a bit different from, what's it you always say? There is no war. There's no war in Ba Sing Se. Is it Ba Sing Se? Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I can't remember. Yeah, but yeah, that's it. There's a little bit that's a bit nicer overall. I think more or less. People will rage about LFR because they'll think, I lost their loot roll, blah. But that's the problem with transparency. Transparency shows you what's happening. Sometimes you don't want to see what's happening. And sometimes people have a much different idea of what's going on under the surface. It's just, they just forget the idea. I mean, that's exactly what they're talking about. You were rolling against, it didn't work the way people felt it was working. It worked differently. So the transparency is going to say this is how it really works.
Yeah.
But it's so understandable and obvious. People go, sure, whatever. But I just hope when people go, I'm angry because someone beat me in the roll, that Blizzard just say, fucking man up, buddy. Go back next week.
Yeah,
because that's how it works.
Looking through Slack, Slack? This isn't Slack. This is the
that's
YouTube
not Slack.
chat.
Yeah,
I was just
different.
looking through chat here. I mean, it seems watertight.
Yeah.
I'm trying to break this in my head.
Yeah.
Seems watertight. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. It's watertight within the parameters.
It's just
that's the point.
The
right?
increased visibility will allow people to be angry at stuff that was happening anyway. They just didn't notice because they weren't shown what was going on.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's watertight within parameters because it is flawed in ways, but those flaws are obvious and transparent, and they're by design. So you're like, yeah, sure. Yeah, this is fine. People will be angry about not having personal loot because they don't understand, or maybe they like the experience better. But I think this is a much better experience overall, because I fucking hate personal loot with a vengeance. I only liked it when it gave me more loot, or at least that's what I was told. And now it doesn't give me more loot. I'm like, fuck this.
Yeah, I mean, Void Track,
the
clarification on equipped gear is not watertight.
Yeah, because you can just fire shit in your bags.
Okay, so the game does actually know what the best thing that you own on your character for a slot is.
Yeah.
I have got to imagine that is what will be used there. Yeah, because there's times in the past where stuff like will have taken into account if you had something in your bank.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to game systems like that. So you are right to point that out. I do believe, based on how they've done things in the past, that should not be a problem.
Yeah.
Overall, this is really good.
Yeah, my issue with group loot is that it's just going to bring drama to bugs. I remember group loot in Dragon Soul LFR where Boomkin would ninja all the Agi gear, except that Boomkin won't be able to roll on agility gear because that's off-spec. So they probably do need an off-spec button, but that's a little bit too much for normal players. Sure, Boomkin, you're like, yeah, you're int gear. You probably can only hit roll on int gear. So there's like things where people could maybe take like the neutral gear, like neck back rings and any neutral trinkets, like quantum device, for example. But that's still like, you know, there'll be fucking hell, there'll be some issues with that goes a little bit wrong, but mostly it will be generally enough fine. They could do a smart loot system where any item can drop, but if you have no cloth wares in your entire raid, cloth items will be less likely to drop. That sounds right, but then that starts to have this impact of you start to super funnel again that way. Whereas this one, you generally want to go, hey, bring a group of varied people. It's on the player. There's a lot of putting enough responsibility on the player that the system doesn't have to do literally everything for them. So you don't have a bad experience. There's a push and pull there.
It's interesting that they feel like they can make a post to player saying a bow can drop if there's no hunter in the group.
Yeah.
Because they obviously made that post knowing that some people will turn around and say, well, that's dumb. Because they're thinking very much from their own perspective, you could say. Yeah. Whereas for Blizzard, they're like, the boss dies. You're shitting the boss. It's you who didn't bring a hunter to the group.
This is your fault.
And that might be a different perspective. But as Matt was saying, that was very just codifying the fact that the loot's on the boss. Whether you can use it or not depends on who who's turned up.
Yeah.
So certainly interesting. There could maybe be if maybe this would be too much because of how this expansion is designed. Because I know there's been times where we've just kind of looked at the WoW loot situation only rating and just thought to ourselves, just increase the amount of loot.
Yeah, it's 4x, please.
Just, yeah. There's times where that has been thought, and I wonder if you could maybe do that alongside a system like this to kind of make it feel like an upgrade to everyone. But then the thing is, because there are deterministic ways of getting very high quality loot, because of all the crafting resources that you will get, and then be able to, via the work order system, get really good gear made for you, they probably think that actually there's enough deterministic, a backstop against bad RNG built into how they've redesigned professions.
That is where they're going to have a lot of... We will have to see how this holistic system feels because, and this is the annoying part, right?
Yeah.
We can talk this round in circles and go, well, what if this? Oh, this sounds good. This seems good. This is very, this is the right direction. What matters at the end is what this is like in a literally fully working system. And you can't even do that in like a beta standard because players don't play betas like they play live games. They just don't. They don't feel the same way about them. They get a lot of like objective kind of feedback, well, this bit wasn't very fun or whatever else, or this, we don't think this is going to work for how the how the spec plays into all these like theoretical design stuff. But there is a literal, everyone is playing this game, everyone's doing this boss. They feel finally attached to the loot because it's no longer beta and fake. It's actually real, and then that's when like the pacing will actually show up because you can design it. But there will be things that will go differently or things that will change. And you do have to actually go, okay, well, we need to test this system in a live environment effectively.
Yeah.
And then hopefully the point is they will see and go, we'll adjust. We will adjust.
Yeah, and they seem like a team more willing to do that.